18-year-old Salvador Ramos barricaded himself inside a fourth-grade classroom at Robb Elementary and systematically executed 19 children and 2 teachers while police waited outside for 77 minutes, creating the deadliest elementary school shooting in Texas history. But this massacre was enabled by catastrophic law enforcement failures that allowed a teenage killer to hunt defenseless children while their parents begged officers to storm the building and save their babies. Salvador Ramos was a troubled teenager from Uvalde, Texas, who had been displaying increasingly violent behavior including animal cruelty, online threats against classmates, and disturbing social media posts fantasizing about school shootings and mass murder. Ramos had been a quiet student who became progressively isolated and aggressive, posting photos of weapons and making statements about wanting to shoot up schools. Ramos had been consuming violent content online and developing an obsession with previous school shooters while planning his own attack on the elementary school in his small hometown. His social media activity revealed months of escalating threats and violent fantasies that went unreported to authorities who might have intervened. On May 24, 2022, Ramos drove to Robb Elementary School in Uvalde during the final weeks of the school year, when children aged 6 to 10 were preparing for summer vacation. The elementary school was filled with innocent children who were learning, playing, and looking forward to their upcoming break from classes. Ramos crashed his vehicle near the school and entered the building armed with an AR-15-style rifle, immediately targeting defenseless children who had no escape routes from their classrooms. His attack focused on fourth-grade students who were trapped in their classroom with their teachers when the shooting began. The massacre continued for over an hour as Ramos systematically murdered 19 children and 2 teachers while law enforcement officers waited outside the building, refusing to enter despite desperate pleas from parents who had arrived at the scene. While children were bleeding to death inside the classroom, police officers restrained parents who tried to rescue their own kids. The 77-minute delay in police response allowed Ramos to continue his execution of elementary school children who could have been saved if officers had acted immediately. Parents watched in horror as law enforcement failed to protect their children from a teenage killer who was methodically murdering students in their classroom. The attack finally ended when Border Patrol agents defied local police orders and entered the building to kill Ramos, but their intervention came too late to save 21 innocent lives. The delayed response became one of the most criticized law enforcement failures in American history. The investigation revealed that multiple agencies had failed to follow active shooter protocols, with officers prioritizing their own safety over the lives of elementary school children who were being executed while they waited outside. The Robb Elementary massacre devastated the small town of Uvalde and exposed how law enforcement failures could enable school shooters to maximize casualties against America's most vulnerable victims, children who trusted adults to protect them. Case 2. Nicholas Cruz. Nicholas Cruz was a 19-year-old former student of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School who had been expelled for disciplinary problems and had made specific threats against the school, students, and staff members that were documented by authorities but failed to prevent his return to commit mass murder. Cruz had a well-documented history of violence, animal cruelty, and disturbing behavior that had brought him to the attention of school officials, law enforcement, and social services. Cruz had been living with a host family after his adoptive mother died, where his violent outbursts and obsession with weapons had created ongoing concerns about his dangerous behavior. His social media accounts were filled with racist content, gun photos, and explicit threats about committing school shootings that were reported to the FBI but not acted upon. Cruz had been consuming content about previous school shooters and had developed detailed knowledge about mass shooting tactics while planning his own attack on his former school. His case would later expose how multiple warning signs and direct threats had been ignored by authorities who could have prevented the massacre. On February 14, 2018, Cruz returned to Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, during dismissal time, when students were preparing to leave for Valentine's Day celebrations with their families and romantic partners. The high school was filled with teenagers who were excited about their Valentine's Day plans and looking forward to the holiday weekend. Cruz entered the school building armed with an AR-15 rifle and began systematically shooting students and staff members in hallways and classrooms as they tried to escape the building. His attack targeted the school he knew intimately, including specific areas where he could trap the maximum number of victims. The massacre unfolded over several minutes as Cruz moved through different floors of the school building, killing 17 people and wounding 17 others during what should have been a celebration of love and friendship. While students had been celebrating Valentine's Day and preparing for dismissal, Cruz was executing his former classmates and teachers. Cruz's victims included students who had been his former classmates, teachers who had tried to help him, and staff members who were working to protect students during the attack. The shooting created immediate panic as students barricaded themselves in classrooms and tried to escape through windows. The attack ended when Cruz discarded his weapon and attempted to blend in with evacuating students, but he was apprehended by law enforcement officers who had responded to the scene. His capture allowed investigators to fully examine his planning and motivations for the Valentine's Day massacre. Cruz pleaded guilty to all charges to avoid the death penalty and received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for his attack on the high school. His case became a symbol of how warning signs and threats could be ignored until they exploded into mass murder. The Parkland shooting sparked a nationwide student activism movement led by survivors who became advocates for gun reform and school safety, transforming their trauma into political action that reached the highest levels of government and inspired millions of young people to demand change. Welcome to Savage Case Files. Today we're exposing America's most notorious school shooters, whose attacks shattered the innocence of childhood and transformed educational institutions into battlegrounds where children learned to fear for their lives instead of focusing on learning and growing. Subscribe to Savage Case Files to never miss our investigations into America's most shocking crimes, where we expose the killers who destroyed communities. Case 3. Adam Lanza. Adam Lanza was a 20-year-old with severe mental illness and an obsession with mass shootings who had spent years studying previous school attacks while planning the most devastating assault on elementary school children in American history. Lanza had been living as a recluse in his mother's home in Newtown, Connecticut, where he consumed violent content and developed detailed knowledge about firearms and mass murder tactics. Lanza had been increasingly isolated from society and had developed an obsession with the Columbine shooters, spending countless hours researching their methods and planning his own attack that would surpass their body count. His mental state had deteriorated over years, as he withdrew from all social contact and focused entirely on preparing for mass violence. Lanza had access to his mother's firearms collection, which she had taught him to use despite his obvious psychological problems and concerning behavior. His mother, Nancy Lanza, had ignored the warning signs of her son's deteriorating condition and continued to provide him access to weapons that he would use to commit mass murder. On December 14, 2012, Lanza began his killing spree by murdering his mother Nancy at their home before driving to Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, where hundreds of children aged 5 to 10 were attending classes just weeks before Christmas vacation. The elementary school was filled with first graders who were learning to read, participating in holiday activities, and preparing for winter break. Lanza forced his way into the locked school building and immediately began systematically executing children and staff members who were trapped in classrooms with no escape routes. His attack focused on first-grade classrooms, where 6- and 7-year-old children were defenseless against his assault rifle. The massacre continued for several minutes as Lanza moved through the school building, killing 20 first-graders and 6 staff members who tried to protect the children from his attack. While 6-year-olds had been learning their ABCs and preparing for Christmas, Lanza was executing America's youngest victims in their classrooms. Lanza's victims included children who had just started their educational journey and teachers who died trying to shield students from the gunfire. The attack created unimaginable horror as first graders were murdered in their classroom while other students hid and listened to the shooting. The massacre ended when Lanza heard law enforcement officers approaching the building and committed suicide rather than face capture. His death denied investigators and families the opportunity to understand his complete motivations for targeting elementary school children. The investigation revealed Lanza's extensive research into previous mass shootings and his methodical planning for an attack that would maximize casualties among the youngest possible victims. His case exposed how untreated illness and access to weapons could combine to create devastating threats to children. The Sandy Hook Elementary Massacre changed America's perception of school safety forever and sparked national debates about gun control, security, and the protection of children in educational settings. Case 4. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were two teenagers who spent over a year planning an elaborate attack on Columbine High School that was designed to kill hundreds of their classmates using bombs and firearms in what they envisioned as the deadliest school attack in American history. Harris, the psychopathic leader, and Klebold, his depressed follower, had been building explosive devices and acquiring weapons while documenting their hatred for their school and classmates. Harris and Klebold had been students at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, where they felt ostracized and bullied by their peers, leading them to develop homicidal fantasies about revenge against their classmates and teachers. Their planning included detailed maps of the school, timing studies of student movements, and extensive preparation of explosive devices intended to collapse the building. The duo had been creating a massive arsenal of weapons and bombs in their homes while their parents remained unaware of the scope of their violent preparations. Their journals and videos revealed months of planning for an attack they called Judgment Day that would surpass previous mass shootings and establish them as the most notorious school killers in history. On April 20, 1999, Harris and Klebold arrived at Columbine High School during lunch period, when the cafeteria and library were packed with hundreds of students who were eating, studying, and socializing with friends. The timing was deliberately chosen to maximize casualties when the school's common areas were most crowded. The attack began when their planted bombs failed to detonate in the cafeteria, forcing them to improvise their massacre using firearms instead of the massive explosion they had planned. Harris and Klebold entered the school building and began systematically shooting students and teachers in hallways, the cafeteria, and the library. The massacre continued for hours as the two killers moved through different areas of the school, targeting students who were hiding under tables and in classrooms. While students had been eating lunch and studying for their classes, Harris and Klebold were executing their classmates and terrorizing survivors who witnessed the carnage. Harris and Klebold killed 13 people and wounded 21 others during their rampage through the school, creating a scene of horror that was broadcast live on television as SWAT teams surrounded the building. Their victims included students who had been their classmates and a teacher who tried to protect students. The attack ended when both killers committed suicide in the school library, surrounded by the bodies of students they had murdered. Their deaths prevented law enforcement from capturing them alive and denied families the opportunity to see them face prosecution for their crimes. The investigation revealed the extensive planning and preparation that had gone into the attack, including detailed journals, videos, and bomb-making materials that showed their intent to kill hundreds of people. Their case became the watershed moment for school safety and security measures across America. The Columbine Massacre transformed how schools approached security, emergency procedures, and threat assessment, while inspiring numerous copycat attacks by individuals who idolized Harris and Klebold as martyrs for their cause of school violence. Case 5. Ethan Crumbley. Ethan Crumbley was a 15-year-old student at Oxford High School whose parents ignored clear warning signs of his deteriorating condition and actually purchased the handgun he would use to kill his classmates, creating the first case in American history where parents were held criminally responsible for their child's school shooting. Crumbley had been displaying obvious signs of planning violence, including drawing disturbing images of guns and dead bodies while writing desperate pleas for help that his parents dismissed. Crumbley had been struggling with his psychological state for months, while his parents, James and Jennifer Crumbley, focused on their own problems and ignored their son's increasingly desperate attempts to get their attention. His school assignments included violent drawings and written statements about his desire to hurt people, but his parents refused to take him home or seek treatment when confronted by school officials. The Crumbleys had purchased a Sig Sauer 9mm handgun as an early Christmas gift for their troubled teenager, despite knowing about his fascination with violence and his deteriorating behavior at school. They failed to secure the weapon and ignored multiple warning signs that their son was planning to use it against his classmates. On November 30, 2021, Ethan Crumbley brought the handgun his parents had given him to Oxford High School in Michigan, where he opened fire on his fellow students during the school day. His attack targeted classmates who were attending classes and moving through hallways between periods. Crumbley killed 4 students and wounded 7 others during his shooting rampage through the high school, using the weapon his parents had provided, while ignoring the obvious signs that he was planning violence. While Ethan had been showing clear signs of planning an attack, his parents had been enabling his access to the very weapon he would use to murder his classmates. The victims included Tate Meyer, a 16-year-old football player who died trying to disarm Crumbley, along with Hannah St. Juliana, Madison Baldwin, and Justin Schilling, all teenagers who were simply attending school when they became casualties of parental negligence and teenage violence. Crumbley was apprehended at the scene and later pleaded guilty to terrorism and murder charges, receiving a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole despite his age. His case marked the first time a juvenile school shooter received such a harsh sentence. The investigation revealed that James and Jennifer Crumbley had ignored multiple opportunities to prevent the shooting, including a meeting with school officials on the morning of the attack where they refused to take their son home, despite his disturbing behavior and violent drawings. Both parents were charged with involuntary manslaughter and convicted for their role in enabling their son's access to the weapon and ignoring warning signs that could have prevented the massacre. Their convictions established a landmark precedent for parental accountability in school shootings. The Oxford High School shooting became a symbol of how parental negligence and easy access to firearms could combine to enable teenage mass murderers, while also demonstrating that parents could be held legally responsible for their failures to prevent their children's violent crimes. K-6. Dimitrios Pagortsis. Dimitrios Pagortsis was a 17-year-old student at Santa Fe High School who had been planning a coordinated attack using his father's firearms and homemade explosive devices, targeting his own school and classmates in what became one of the deadliest high school shootings in Texas history. Pagortsis had been a quiet student who showed few obvious warning signs before his violent rampage that would devastate the small Texas community. Pagortsis had access to his father's shotgun and revolver, which he took from the family home along with homemade explosive devices he had constructed for his attack on Santa Fe High School. His planning included studying the school layout and timing his attack for maximum impact during the school day, when classrooms and hallways would be filled with students and teachers. Pagortsis had been attending Santa Fe High School as a regular student while secretly preparing for his attack against his own classmates and teachers. His case would later reveal how teenage killers could hide their violent intentions while living seemingly normal lives with their families and attending school regularly. On May 18, 2018, Pagortsis arrived at Santa Fe High School in Texas, armed with his father's firearms, and began shooting students and teachers in art classrooms and other areas of the school building. His attack targeted fellow students who were attending their regular classes and had no reason to suspect that one of their classmates was planning to murder them. The shooting created immediate panic as students and teachers tried to escape the building while Paguazis moved through different areas of the school, killing and wounding his victims. His attack focused on art classes where students had been working on creative projects and learning from teachers who tried to protect them during the violence. Paguazis killed 10 people and wounded 13 others during his rampage through Santa Fe High School, using both firearms and explosive devices that he had prepared for the attack. His victims included students who had been his classmates and teachers who had been educating him alongside his future victims. The attack ended when law enforcement officers engaged Paguazis in a gunfight and wounded him, forcing his surrender and preventing additional casualties. His capture allowed investigators to examine his planning and motivations for attacking his own school community. The investigation revealed Paguazis had been planning the attack and had constructed explosive devices to maximize casualties during his assault on the high school. His case exposed how teenage killers could access family firearms and create additional weapons for school attacks. Paguazis was found incompetent to stand trial due to his psychological condition and was confined to a state facility for treatment, denying victims' families the opportunity to see him prosecuted for his crimes against the Santa Fe High School community. The Santa Fe High School shooting became another example of how American schools remained vulnerable to attacks by their own students, while highlighting the ongoing challenge of identifying and preventing teenage killers who showed few obvious warning signs before their violent rampages. Case 7. Michael Carnell. Michael Carnell was a 14-year-old freshman at Heath High School who opened fire on a student prayer group, killing 3 teenage girls and wounding 5 others, in what became one of the first widely publicized school shootings of the modern era. Carnell had been a quiet, academically successful student who was bullied by classmates and felt increasingly isolated from his peers at the Kentucky high school. Carnell had been struggling with his social status at Heath High School, where he was teased and marginalized by other students who viewed him as an outsider. His feelings of rejection and anger had been building for months as he consumed violent media content and developed fantasies about gaining respect through violence against his classmates. Carnell had stolen a .22 caliber pistol from a neighbor's garage and brought additional weapons to school, planning his attack on fellow students who he believed had rejected and humiliated him. His targeting of the prayer group was deliberate, as he viewed the religious students as representatives of the school community that had excluded him. On December 1, 1997, Carnell arrived at Heath High School in West Paducah, Kentucky, and approached a student prayer circle that met regularly in the school lobby before classes began. The prayer group consisted of students who gathered voluntarily to pray and share their faith with classmates in a peaceful morning ritual. Carnell opened fire on the defenseless students who were participating in prayer, killing 3 girls and wounding 5 others who had been engaged in religious fellowship. While students had been praying for their school and community, Carnell was executing them for their faith and their acceptance within the school's social structure. His victims included Nicole Hadley, Jessica James, and Case Steger, all teenage girls who had been participating in the voluntary prayer group when Carnell targeted them for murder. The wounded students included several who suffered permanent disabilities from their gunshot injuries. The shooting ended when Carnell stopped firing and was disarmed by other students who tackled him in the school lobby. His surrender allowed law enforcement to apprehend him without additional violence, but the damage to the Heath High School community had already been done. The investigation revealed Carnell's feelings of social rejection and his consumption of violent media that had influenced his decision to attack his classmates. His case became an early example of how teenage social isolation could explode into deadly violence against fellow students. Carnell was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years, making him one of the youngest school shooters to receive such a harsh sentence. His case established precedents for prosecuting juvenile mass murderers as adults, The Heath High School shooting shocked the nation and became one of the first school attacks to receive extensive media coverage, foreshadowing the epidemic of school violence that would follow in subsequent years across America. Case 8. Kip Kinkle. Kip Kinkle was a 15-year-old student who murdered both of his parents at their Oregon home before driving to Thurston High School and opening fire on his classmates in the cafeteria, creating a horrific family annihilation followed by a school massacre that shocked the Pacific Northwest. Kinkle had been struggling with severe psychological problems and an obsession with violence that his parents had tried to address through therapy and medication. Kinkle had been expelled from Thurston High School the day before his attack for bringing a gun to campus, leading to his arrest and his parents' decision to take him home while they figured out how to handle his escalating behavioral problems. His expulsion had triggered a violent rage that would explode into multiple murders within 24 hours. Kinkle had access to his family's firearms collection and had been fascinated with weapons and explosives for years, despite his parents' attempts to monitor his dangerous interests. His psychological condition had been deteriorating for months as he developed paranoid thoughts and violent fantasies about killing his classmates and family members. On May 20, 1998, Kinkle shot and killed his father Bill when he returned home from work, then waited for his mother Faith to arrive home from her teaching job before murdering her as well. After killing both parents, Kinkle spent the night in the house with their bodies while planning his attack on Thurston High School. On May 21, 1998, Kinkle drove to Thurston High School in Springfield, Oregon, and entered the cafeteria during lunch period when it was packed with students eating and socializing. His attack targeted the crowded cafeteria where he could inflict maximum casualties on his former classmates who were trapped in the enclosed space. Kinkle opened fire with a semi-automatic rifle, killing 2 students and wounding 25 others as panicked teenagers dove under tables and tried to escape the cafeteria. While students had been enjoying lunch and talking with friends, Kinkle was systematically shooting his former classmates in revenge for his expulsion. The shooting ended when several wounded students, including Jacob Riker, tackled Kinkle and disarmed him despite their injuries. Their heroic actions prevented additional casualties and allowed other students to escape the cafeteria safely. The investigation revealed the full scope of Kinkle's violence, including the murder of his parents and his extensive planning for the school attack. His case exposed how untreated psychological illness could escalate from family violence to mass murder at schools. Kinkle was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 111 years, ensuring he would never be released from prison. His case became a landmark example of how family dysfunction and access to weapons could combine to create teenage mass murderers. The Thurston High School massacre highlighted the intersection of domestic violence and school shootings, while demonstrating how student heroes could stop active shooters and save lives during attacks on educational institutions. Before we continue, I want to ask you, which case shocked you most so far? The elementary school massacre where 20 first graders were executed in their classrooms just weeks before Christmas? Or the parents who bought their troubled teenager the gun he used to murder his classmates? Was it the 77-minute police delay that allowed a killer to hunt children while their parents begged officers to act? Or the 2 teenagers who spent over a year planning to bomb their school and kill hundreds of their classmates? Share your thoughts on what could have prevented these massacres. Case 9. Andrew Golden and Mitchell Johnson. Andrew Golden, age 11, and Mitchell Johnson, age 13, were the youngest school shooters in American history when they executed a coordinated attack on Westside Middle School that killed 5 people and wounded 10 others, proving that even elementary-aged children could plan and carry out mass murder against their classmates and teachers. Golden and Johnson had been students at the Arkansas Middle School where they felt rejected by peers and developed homicidal fantasies about revenge. Golden and Johnson had access to multiple firearms from their family's collections and had been planning their attack for weeks, studying the school's layout and developing a strategy to maximize casualties among their fellow students. Their plan involved using a fire alarm to draw victims outside where they could shoot them from a wooded area near the school. The boys had stolen rifles and handguns from Golden's grandfather's house and positioned themselves in the woods adjacent to West Side Middle School, where they waited for their plan to unfold. Their systematic preparation showed a level of planning that shocked investigators, who had never encountered such young mass murderers. On March 24, 1998, Johnson pulled the fire alarm at West Side Middle School in Jonesboro, Arkansas, forcing students and teachers to evacuate the building according to standard safety procedures. The evacuation created the perfect opportunity for Golden and Johnson to ambush their victims as they exited the school building. Golden and Johnson opened fire on the evacuating students and teachers from their concealed position in the woods, killing 4 students and 1 teacher while wounding 10 others. While students and staff had been following fire safety procedures designed to protect them, the 2 boys were using those same procedures to trap and murder their victims. Their victims included students Natalie Brooks, Paige Ann Herring, Stephanie Johnson, and Brittany Varner, along with teacher Shannon Wright, who died trying to shield her students from the gunfire. The wounded included several students who suffered permanent injuries from the ambush attack. The shooting ended when Golden and Johnson attempted to flee the scene but were quickly apprehended by law enforcement officers who had responded to the school. Their capture revealed the shocking ages of the perpetrators and the extent of their planning for the coordinated attack. Because of their ages, Golden and Johnson were tried as juveniles and sentenced to confinement until age 21, meaning they served relatively short sentences for their mass murder of classmates and teachers. Their case exposed gaps in the juvenile justice system's ability to handle child mass murderers. Golden later faced additional legal troubles as an adult, including weapons charges that violated his juvenile sentence conditions. Johnson was released and has remained out of legal trouble, but their case established the disturbing precedent of elementary-age school shooters. The West Side Middle School shooting shocked America with the youth of the perpetrators and demonstrated that even children could plan and execute coordinated attacks on their schools and classmates. Case 10, Brenda Spencer. Brenda Spencer was a 16-year-old girl who opened fire on Grover Cleveland Elementary School from her bedroom window across the street, killing 2 adults and wounding 9 children in an attack that shocked America with both its randomness and her chilling explanation for the violence. Spencer had been living with her father in a house directly across from the elementary school, giving her a perfect vantage point to target children and staff as they arrived for the school day. Spencer had been struggling with family problems and had received a rifle as a Christmas gift from her father, despite her history of behavioral issues and concerning statements about violence. Her access to the weapon and her proximity to the elementary school created the perfect conditions for her to carry out an attack on defenseless children. Spencer had been watching the elementary school from her bedroom window for months, observing the daily routines of students and staff members who had no idea they were being surveilled by a troubled teenager with a rifle. Her case would become one of the first widely publicized school shootings to receive extensive media coverage. On January 29, 1979, Spencer positioned herself at her bedroom window and began shooting at Grover Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego, California, as children and staff arrived for the Monday morning school day. Her attack targeted the school playground and entrance areas where children were most vulnerable. Spencer killed Principal Burton Ragg and custodian Mike Sichar, both adults who died trying to protect children from her gunfire. She also wounded 9 children who were simply arriving at school or playing on the playground when she began her shooting spree from across the street. The attack continued for several hours as Spencer held police at bay while continuing to fire at the elementary school, creating terror among parents who arrived to find their children's school under siege. Her elevated position gave her tactical advantages that allowed her to continue the attack for an extended period. The shooting ended when police negotiators convinced Spencer to surrender after hours of standoff, Her capture led to one of the most infamous quotes in criminal history when she told reporters that she committed the attack because "I don't like Mondays" and wanted to liven up the day. Spencer's casual explanation for murdering adults and wounding children shocked the nation and inspired the Boomtown Rats song "I Don't Like Mondays," which brought international attention to her case. Her flippant attitude toward the violence became a symbol of senseless school attacks. Spencer was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison and remains incarcerated decades later, with multiple parole requests denied due to the severity of her crimes and her lack of genuine remorse for targeting elementary school children. The I Don't Like Mondays shooting became one of the first school attacks to receive widespread media coverage and established many of the patterns that would characterize future school violence, including the targeting of children during vulnerable moments. These 10 school shooters reveal disturbing patterns that expose how America's educational institutions became vulnerable targets for mass murderers, who specifically chose schools because they offered defenseless victims trapped in enclosed spaces with limited escape routes. From elementary schools where 6-year-olds were executed in their classrooms, to high schools where teenagers were gunned down during lunch periods, each attack demonstrated how killers exploited the trust and openness that defined American education. The common themes across these cases show how warning signs were repeatedly ignored by families, schools, and authorities who could have intervened before violence erupted. Access to weapons proved critical in every case, whether through family gun collections, parental gifts, or stolen firearms that enabled teenagers to transform their violent fantasies into mass murder. Attack methodologies showed systematic planning rather than impulsive violence, with killers studying school layouts, timing student movements, and choosing locations that would maximize casualties. Motivational patterns ranged from revenge against bullying and social rejection to family dysfunction that exploded into violence against innocent victims. The victim demographics reveal how these attacks specifically targeted America's most vulnerable populations: elementary school children who trusted their teachers, middle school students who were still developing their identities, and high school teenagers who were preparing for their futures. Each killer understood that schools provided trapped victims who had no reason to expect violence in their educational environment. Security failures enabled these attacks through inadequate protection measures, delayed law enforcement responses, and institutional policies that prioritized openness over safety. The Robb Elementary massacre exposed catastrophic police failures, while multiple schools lacked basic security measures that could have prevented or limited these attacks. Legal evolution shows changing approaches to juvenile justice and parental accountability, with recent cases like Oxford establishing precedents for holding parents criminally responsible for their children's school violence. The progression from juvenile sentences for the West Side shooters to life imprisonment for teenage killers reflects society's growing recognition of the severity of school attacks. The psychological impact extends far beyond immediate casualties to include trauma on survivors, families, communities, and the national psyche that transformed childhood education from a safe haven into a potential battleground requiring active shooter drills and security measures. Which case do you think could have been prevented? Let us know in the comment section. Finally, did you enjoy this video? I promise to bring you more interesting videos like this one. I will greatly appreciate if you like, share, and subscribe to Savage Case Files for more investigations into America's most shocking crimes. This has been Savage Case Files. See you in our next video.